After their invention in 1260, firearms have changed the world. They allowed people with little training to defeat those who had dedicated their lives to learning to fight. They allowed small numbers of people to defeat larger opposition forces. Since their invention, they have been improved upon greatly, becoming possible to shoot upwards of 100 bullets per second, or capable of launching 8-ton shells distances of 24 miles. Modern guns are easy-to-use, efficient killing machines. Because of this, laws have been enacted that restrict how they can be owned. Different countries restrict the rights different amounts. The majority of the Australian people, through the government, restricted the rights of the people to own firearms over the objections that it was trampling the rights of the minority. Gun control is important because it is historically a disputed topic, currently a hotly debated topic, and it has to do with our safety. Starting in Japan in the shogunate era, many countries have attempted to restrict or ban guns with varying levels of success. Japan tried to destroy all their guns in 1607 with a fair amount of success. This was put in place because the elite warriors, the samurai, felt like the guns gave them a disadvantage. In 1775, the British military attempted to take arms from Massachusetts colonists in an effort to make their occupation easier. They failed to take the arms and instead were challenged on the battlefield. In their first conflict, they overran the opposition like they expected, but were driven back to their base in their second bout, showing a small number of dedicated people can challenge the greatest military in the world, and through the use of guns, win. In Great Britain, guns were widely owned and generally legal until Thomas Watt Hamilton went on a shooting spree in a Dublin school in 1996. After this, laws were passed that effectively made the private ownership of guns illegal, and guns were got back by the government. Currently in the United States, the issue of gun rights is a hotly debated topic. The people for private gun ownership point to the way the country gained its independence from Great Britain, through the use of privately owned guns. The people who want to restrict gun ownership point instead to the Port Arthur massacre in Australia, the Dublin school shooting in Great Britain, and the massacres that happened in the United States, generally the Newtown shooting, where Adam Lanza killed 20 elementary students, 6 teachers, his mother, and himself, and the Virginia Tech massacre, where Sung Hu Cho killed 32 people, injured 17, then killed himself. On April 28, 1996, Martin Bryant started a series of shootings in the tourist hotspot of Port Arthur, a former penal colony in Tasmania, southeast Australia. His first shooting took place in Broad Arrow Cafe in the Port Arthur complex. He killed 12 people and wounded 10 others in the course of 15 seconds with a Colt AR-15 carbine. He then proceeded to move to the neighboring gift shop, and in the course of 2 minutes he killed 8 more and injured 2 more. Staff managed to escape and started warning people outside, but were quickly followed by Bryant, who killed 4 people and injured 6 more in the car park outside the cafe and gift shop after switching guns to an FN FAL. He got into his car and chased after those attempting to escape on foot, and when he got to the toll booth at the entrance to the complex, he switched cars after killing the driver and 6 others while wounding another person. He continued driving in his carjacked vehicle, and he got to a service station, where he killed another victim, abducted another, putting him in the trunk of the car. While driving back to his house, he shot at passing cars, killing 3 and wounding 4. He managed to kill 35 people and wound 23 in the course of approximately half an hour. The police, who were attending a false crime, arrived too late to prevent those killings, but managed to trap him inside his guest house. An 18-hour standoff ensued with hostages, which later turned out to be dead, but kept the police at bay for the duration of the standoff. The standoff ended when Bryant lit his house on fire in an attempt to force the police to make a move to save the hostages. Instead, the police waited and allowed the house to burn and forced Bryant to vacate, and they arrested him when he did. Similar to Great Britain, in Australia, guns were commonly owned until the Port Arthur massacre brought enough attention before the Australian people and government to trigger a massive buyback of guns and laws to be passed greatly restricting gun rights. Semi-automatic rifles, automatic rifles, and shotguns were banned by the government, and anyone who possessed them had to sell them back to the government, as the Australian Constitution prohibits the government from taking property without just compensation. Single-shot rifles and pistols were not banned, but were heavily regulated. The Prime Minister of Australia, John Howard, spearheaded the campaign to restrict gun rights after the Port Arthur shooting. Howard had to force the states to agree to the National Firearms Agreement, as it is not allowed in the Australian Constitution for the Commonwealth to restrict gun rights. These laws were met with a lot of controversy. Many worried that these laws would be the portents to a police state. Sports shooters believed that these laws were a threat to their sport. Some organizations, such as Pistol Australia and the Sporting Shooters Association of Australia, have been able to have the restrictions on some firearms alleviated. The country was politically divided on the issue of these laws. Rallies were held, ads were ran, large amounts of fundraising occurred, all with the goal of stopping these laws. Through all this, the laws were passed. Many politicians' careers ended because they supported these reforms, but when asked, they do not regret it. Instead, they are proud their political lives are dead so that people's real lives may be alive. The amount of homicides in Australia has dropped 59%, and suicides have dropped by 65% since the laws were enacted. The percent rate of suicides and homicides involving guns were on a slow decline for a fair amount of time, but have dropped significantly since 1996. They have had 0 mass shootings since 1996, that is, 0 shootings harming more than 4 people. The decline in suicides is not merely a decline in suicidal people. You will never know that rate. What it is a decline in suicide people who could easily get access to an easy-to-use tool of death. The restriction of guns meant that less people are killing themselves with a gun. If someone is committed to suicide, they will do it, but restricting guns make people think through it more, thus reducing the amount of suicides. Today there is no longer as much controversy over the laws as when they were enacted, but it is still present. Most of the country enjoys the safety the laws bring. They feel no constraint under the laws because they have no need or want to own a gun, let alone a high-power firearm. Those who do want to own guns, especially high-power firearms, for whatever reason, legitimate or not, feel that these laws greatly restrict their freedom and are therefore opposed to them. The people who support the gun laws point to the dropped rates of suicide and homicide to give reason to the laws. They argue that it is in the best interest of Australia to keep the laws because they prevent homicides and discourage suicides. They also point to the fact they have been mass shooting free for 18 years to prove that these laws work and should remain in effect. Those opposed argue that the laws were made with too much emotion tied in and go over the limits of reason. They argue that people can be trusted with more responsibility than the laws give room for, and that they encroach too much on their rights. They feel it is beyond the reasonable interest of the government to restrict guns as much as they have, and therefore argue for the reduction of restrictions, occasionally arguing for total repeal of the laws enacted since the Port Arthur massacre. Guns remain a useful tool for dealing with wildlife, but in the wrong hands can be turned into weapons of evil. There are certainly practical and recreational uses for guns, some of which the Australian government overlooked when drafting its laws. The laws have been amended to allow more practical uses of firearms, but advocates still lobby for less restrictions for sporting reasons.